very cruel making me follow that. So you'll realise that what I'm about to present will be in a far more serious register. And perhaps that's quite ironic given the actual nature of my subject. But anyway, we'll see. As Jay suggested at the outset of the event, today, this evening, we're here to consider a group of practices which are brought together on the basis of the lowly or minor status accorded to them within hierarchies of taste and criticism. This minor status might be derived on the terms of genre. You might think, for instance, of burlesque, stripping, or circus performance as minor genres, insofar as they reside rather too closely to spectacle, and they're presumed to offer up all too easy pleasures of titillation and entertainment. This is to effectively prevent us from thinking about these practices in the category of the major and of an increased value and importance. The category of the major, we might think more in terms of something like the high serious forms of theatre, live art, or dance. The performances that we're going to see this evening might also be understood as minor, insofar as they stage or they embody various minoritarian performances of sexual and gendered identity, specifically of queer and trans identity. So what I wanted to do, what I wanted to offer as my contribution, was some further thinking on the very category of the minor, because it's something that I'm working on at the moment in a new book I'm researching on cultural seriousness and contemporary queer performance. I thought it might be useful to try and open up this category of the minor and the ways that we might understand it, in order to begin to forge what might be a queer philosophical take upon the very idea of cultural value. That all sounds very grand and very serious, and perhaps it is, and that's the incongruous nature of the project that I've set myself. Now, I should probably begin by saying that there are two key ways in which the category of the minor is habitually used that I want to actually depart from. The first is the way in which the minor is used as a category of criticism, as a category of art criticism, of theatre criticism, etc. When a practice is labelled minor in those kinds of discursive realms, that practice is usually, as it were, denied value or accredited with a lesser degree of value when compared with those practices which are accredited with major status. So this would be, if you like, the received and conservative way in which we might use the category. It's a category which, as it were, freezes the object that you attach the term to in a hegemonic, hierarchical system of value and judgment. And the approach towards the minor that I want to suggest here is not that. Okay? It might overlap with it at times, it might, as it were, risk reasserting conventional value judgment, but it's one that I wanted to try and to exit from. I forgot my water. The second category, and it's probably the elephant in the room for most of you who are into contemporary critical theory, is of course the work of Deleuze and Guattari. Which ain't going to get a laugh. Or maybe it will. Now it might be possible to think of some of the practices that we have seen thus far and are going to see later on as minor practices in the Deleuze and Guattarian sense, insofar as that they approach the category of the minor as a kind of guerrilla practice, a guerrilla cultural activity, in their terms, a deterritorialization of major language forms. Of course, their study is from literature, the work of Franz Kafka. And Kafka's work is minor by dint of its kind of Jewish use of the German language. It embodies a minoritarian deterritorialization of a major language like German, insofar as it becomes intermixed with Czech and Yiddish. So there's your two, if you like, received understandings of the term. The first one from criticism, which I want to call a very conservative use of the term, and the second one from contemporary critical theory, from, if you like, radical thought, which I want to call the radical understanding of the minor. The concept of the minor, or the use of the term that I want to suggest in distinction from those two, is the idea of the queer minor. And this might be understood in a more, as it were, positive or affirmative sense, the way in which we might denote or term something minor in order to indicate the alternative ways in which that practice or that set of practices might encapsulate or embody cultural value. Okay? So I'm thinking very much of a trashy, campy performer, a late performer who was the figurehead of the ridiculous theatre company in New York, Charles Ludlam, who said something very interesting in an interview in 1978. It's a quotation that I'm going to read to you now, and it's become very, very generative in thinking about, this queer take on the minor. Ludlam said in 1978, quote, "The whole idea of seriousness is awful to me. It sounds like something imposed from without. It doesn't really imply gravity or profundity. It implies decorum, behaving yourself, and that's what I don't like about it." It's a fantastic quotation. I'll just read it quickly again. "The whole idea of seriousness is awful to me. It sounds like something imposed from without. It doesn't really imply gravity or profundity. It implies decorum, behaving yourself, and that's what I don't like about it." I'm drawn to thinking like this, to thinking of seriousness as an imposed form of cultural etiquette or appropriate behaviour. Ludlam's insight here is actually very instructive in beginning to theorise seriousness itself, which, given the groaning weight of all our critical theory bookshelves, is something we do surprisingly infrequently. In general terms, we probably all feel we know what it means to price. In general terms, we probably all feel we know what it means to prize something by taking it seriously, i.e., it is to value and give credence to it, to confer value upon it by suggesting that, for example, it is worthy of our time and attention, or that it requires from us a just and respectful attitude. In the context of the specialised endeavours of cultural criticism, this just and respectful attitude we might broadly label Leavisite, to signal the importance of close scrutiny, rigorous judgment, and sustained reflection to now received understandings of seriousness in the English-speaking world. To characterise seriousness in such a way is to signal, especially after the sociology of taste of Pierre Bourdieu and others, the historic association of such values with bourgeois protocols of literary appreciation. Such forms of purportedly proper reading were championed by the Leavises, particularly by Queenie Leavis in her 1932 study, Fiction and the Reading Public, and separated out from the presumptively easy and distracted reading pleasures of what she snobbishly referred to as the herd. Very nice to say so. Ludlam's comments about seriousness being about decorum then, and behaving oneself, as well as his accompanying desire to behave badly, have to be understood, I think, in the context of such deeply entrenched models of class propriety and cultural moralising. To be an artist like Ludlam, who was interested, as he once put it, quote, in unhinging the pretensions of serious art, is thus to set one's face against a formidable and predominant compulsion in artistic and intellectual life to fall in line with the largely puritanical values of seriousness. And this is something I want to look into more, whether or not the kind of model of seriousness that somebody like Queenie Leavis represents and champions is actually a very culturally specific one, maybe a Protestant model of seriousness, but you know, whether or not that degree of seriousness is so prevalent within Catholic cultures, for instance, is something that I think would bear a lot of further, perhaps even serious scrutiny. This compulsion, this embedded, if you like, compulsion to be serious is harder to resist, however, than you might think. Listen to me now. Even though we may not consider ourselves as elitist or archly discriminating as the Leaguers, for all too often we simply reiterate the values of seriousness idly and tacitly by dint of the ritual and more unthinking judgments we make in, e.g., assessing the merits of a work of art, or perhaps recommending someone in a professional context as a serious and committed individual. I was fairly kind of rudely awakened to this fact when I've been doing this work on seriousness for a number of months, and then I was, as you do as an academic, ritualistically, I had to write a reference for one of my students, I think, to do further study. And I found that the first line that I wrote was, X is a serious and committed student. So almost despite myself, I was, turning to the values of seriousness and committedness as the preeminent values of studentship, of scholarship, without even thinking about it. We often draw upon the behaviours or the languages of seriousness then, almost without thinking, without any critical consideration for the ways in which we perpetuate them through our actions. Indeed, we tend only to become conscious of seriousness when we feel that we fall short of it, perhaps when we feel or even fear that we are being too flip or trivial, for instance, in addressing the subject at hand. But even then, such a consciousness rarely gives rise to any sustained reflection on seriousness as such, and instead usually makes us act in order to bring us back into line, to recommit ourselves properly to the serious import of whatever it is we feel we've done a disservice to. 5 more minutes? I point all this out in order to propose a Foucauldian understanding of seriousness as a normative technology of conduct, one which is also very much in line with Ludlam's thinking. In thinking seriousness as a kind of Foucauldian technology of itself, we can highlight the routine ways in which it operates and makes subjects of us, principally through compelling us to act, and act seriously, in the face of those things which we take to be important to us. And this is what I'm interested in. I'm interested in how we ascribe importance to something, and how the culture of seriousness has become the preeminent, or the hegemonic culture through which importance gets ascribed. And that's what I want to trouble, and I think what a lot of the performers tonight are interested also in troubling. This Foucauldian technology of seriousness takes hold of us precisely as we mark the value of those things that we hold dear, i.e., we become serious about someone or something when we signal the depth of our commitment to them and the profound importance that they hold for us. But what if seriousness doesn't really imply gravity and profundity as Ludlam suggests? What if instead seriousness is as much about, or even more about, the perpetuation of certain forms of cultural relation, or certain attitudes and ways of being? Is being serious just a way then of reproducing seriousness itself? This is the broad thrust of argument in a much overlooked and insightful essay by the late Alan White from 1983, in which he writes the following, quote, "Seriousness always has more to do with power than with content. The authority to designate what is to be taken seriously and the authority to enforce reverential solemnity in certain contexts is a way of creating and maintaining power, i.e., it is the power of seriousness itself and the manners and languages of those groups who would claim seriousness for themselves that are maintained in such a self-perpetuating technology. The serious attitude, purportedly cluing us into the presence of something grave and significant, serves in actual fact to reproduce the hegemony of serious culture as the place where value and importance are established. But why should established protocols of sober or earnest attention be the predominant ways in which we mark the worth of those things we hold dear? And what alternative possibilities might contemporary performance art suggest for generatively acting and thinking at odds with serious culture? I just want to leave you with maybe some suggestions for how we might begin to think that, how we might be able to think importance, think value at odds with serious culture, by citing Oscar Wilde and one of his famous maxims, actually written in The Importance of Being Earnest. Life is too important to take it seriously. It's a great queer quotation, and I take it as, if you like, talismanic of a queer philosophy of value, as a statement of a queer minor mode of importance. To think that importance might be better served by being flip, light, or trivial about it, rather than being sober and serious. And we can think perhaps of multiple examples of contemporary performance practice that might embody this. Something perhaps like David Boyle's recent series of shows at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern called Magazine, in which grave matters like war, HIV and AIDS, and mental health are addressed through David's own particular brand of stand-up comedy. Or we might think of the work of contemporary London-based artist Orit Asheri and her work on the 17th century, 16th century Jewish Messiah, some say false Messiah, called Shabtai Zvi. Part of that work involved audience participation, a kind of participation which engaged audience members as amateur performers in a really piss-poor play reading. So there's a sense in which, there's just two examples, which might be contemporary examples, which embody something of Wilde's call to if you like, to recognise the importance of something outside of the context of serious culture. I have plenty more to say, but I think I've probably said enough there, so I'll wind up.